Okay, to get the Vanos off, what I'll start with first is removal of this air filter box, which will give us easier access to the fan removal, which we'll have to do later, and also we'll be able to get to the Vanos solenoid electrical plug, which is located underneath the intake in this general area. So I'll start with removing the cruise control first, using a 10mm socket. Alright, then we can swing this up out of the way. Next, we want to move this mass air meter out of the way. So we'll just disconnect that. I'll do these latches here. And also, we want to disconnect the boot here that goes to the throttle body. There. So another thing I do is disconnect the throttle position sensor plug, and the reason for that is because it will give us easier access to get to the flywheel lock pin, which is part of the Vanos toolkit. And I kind of reach down right through here with my right hand to get to it. So then we want to disconnect the cold air pickup for the air filter box. And we can slide this up just a little bit. And what we have here is a thermostat housing for the throttle body, which, to my knowledge, it warms up the throttle body when the outside temperature drops to freezing. And that takes a 10mm socket. And the filter box just comes straight out from there. So one last thing I'll do is remove the alternator cooling duct. And that's pretty much it for this area. What we'll do next is move on to removing the radiator cover, and then we'll tackle that fan. Alright? Okay, so what I'll do next is remove this radiator cover, and then we'll be able to get to the shroud. And it's held on by Phillips screws. And slip that off. Alright, so we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so I'm ready to get that fan out. So one thing I did is I released a strap down here that holds this coolant line, and that goes to the coolant bottle. So by doing that, we can rotate the shroud further away from the motor and give us some more room in this area. So first I'll disconnect this line, but first I'll open up the radiator cap to relieve any pressure that may be in there. Okay, I'm going to cap this off with a 1/4 inch extension, and I have a vacuum cap to plug off the radiator with. Okay, so we have a plastic fastener up here. And one over here. Okay, now we can break that fan loose. So I have a BMW water pump pulley holding tool, and the pulley bolts go through these two holes and just hold it in place as you knock it loose. Also, I have an 1.25 inch open end wrench. A 32mm will work as well. Alright, so we're going to knock this clockwise because the fan nut's a reverse thread nut. And we'll spin the fan off and rest it in the shroud. Okay, that's good. Alright, so now we can lift up the shroud and pull the fan out. Alright, so before we rotate the shroud, we have to disconnect the level sensor plug down here that goes to the coolant bottle. Just rotate it and rest it on the fender here. Alright, so that's it. Next we'll move on to the next step. Alright. Okay, so I'm ready to tackle this valve cover here, and I went ahead and removed the beauty covers, and I put the oil cap back on just as a safety precaution so nothing falls in. So next I'll remove this connector on the valve cover here. Then I remove the plugs from the coils, and I have a flat blade screwdriver to lift those brackets up. That's good. So from here I just removed the nuts on the coils. Then pull the coils out one by one, and I'll work my way across, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so I got all the coils out, and what I usually do is tie up these wires so they're not hanging over the valve cover. I'm tying it off to the hood strut. It seems to be a good spot for it. Alright, let's get there. So from here, it's just removing all the nuts on the valve cover. So I'll continue removing those. And just one thing I want to bring up is behind the oil cap, the nut that's back here. It's really hard to get to, and I found that using a 1/4 inch ratchet with a short shallow socket will work just fine to get in there, and it just takes a little while. The only other thing is the ground wire needs to come off, and from there we'll pull the valve cover. Alright. So from here we want to pull the splash shield, and I pull straight up on it to get it out. So what I'll do next is strike the gaskets, and then I'll break out the Vanos tool set, and we'll take it from there. Alright. Okay, so to prep for the Vanos removal, I need to get this motor on top dead center, and then put in the camshaft locking blocks and also the flywheel lock pin. And the tool kit for the Vanos and also the camshaft locking blocks are in these two kits here. So there's a part number here for that one. And then the Vanos turning tool, which also has a flywheel lock pin. That's this guy. So what I need to do first is rotate the crank clockwise until my top dead center marks line up. Now I can't show you what it looks like down there because it's too tight to get my camera in, but I do have a spare damper I can show you. So there's an O, a vertical line in the middle, and then a T. What you want to do is rotate this clockwise until this center line lines up with the timing case cover line, and once they're both in line, you're on top dead center. Then you can put in your flywheel lock pin, which is located underneath the starter. And there's also a plug that covers that flywheel access hole. So this has to come out, and then you can put in your flywheel lock pin. This one's broken off though, but they look like this. They might be different colors though. So what I'll do first is rotate this motor and get those lines matched up. I'm going to go ahead and use a mirror because you can't see the marks from the top. So another indicator you can look for is the intake and exhaust camshaft lobes. When they're pointing up in a 45-degree angle towards each other, that's a good indicator that you're on top dead center as well. So I'll go ahead and install my flywheel lock pin. Now if you're not sure if it locked the flywheel, what you can do is rotate your breaker bar back and forth until it does lock. And there, it locked there. Okay, from here the camshaft locking blocks will go in, and I've already removed the 3 studs on the back of the cylinder head, which are these guys, and that just allows the blocks to sit flush against the head. So here's those blocks. They're in that kit. And they should sit flush against the head if your timing's correct. Which mine are, so that's good. Okay, so that's pretty much it. We're on top dead center. The flywheel's locked, our cams are locked. So I'm going to move the camera over to the front of the motor, and then we'll start taking that Vanos off, and then we'll take it from there. Alright. Okay, to get the Vanos off, what I'll do first is remove these access plugs so we can get to the Torx bolts here. Okay, so now what we can do is compress this tensioner here using the Vanos pin. And a good tensioner will give you a lot of resistance on the first try. Kind of feels like a hydraulic piston instead of a spring. Okay, so that's good there. So I'm using an E8 Torx socket, and we're just going to loosen these just a little bit so the sprocket can rotate later. Okay, from here, what we want to do is remove all the hardware from the Vanos, and also this little harness clip here. I'm going to just pull this guy off all the way. I'm going to go ahead and use some air on this to speed things up. Lost one down. Also the lifting bracket here. That's good. Okay, so the Vanos oil line can come off. Put a little towel here. Sometimes oil comes out. Take the hardware with it. Okay, so also the Vanos solenoid electrical plug needs to be disconnected. It's kind of down behind the oil filter. Alright, that's good there. Alright, what we want to do is rotate the sprockets clockwise, which will force the Vanos off. And there it is there. And Vanos. Okay, so what I'll do next is get my tools together and we'll take off all the hardware and sprockets from the front of the camshafts and then we'll take it from there. Alright? Okay, so next what I'll do is remove the sprockets. I'm going to go ahead and use some air here to speed things up. Put this in here, I don't want anything falling into that motor. Okay. So we have our 4mm thick plate, spring diaphragm, then we have our 2mm thick plate, and that's a spring diaphragm setup right there. So now what I'll do is remove these Torx bolts here. Take this plate out. Okay, before we pull the sprocket off here, I'm just going to wipe this down. What we want to do is mark it. In case we skip a tooth, when we pull it off, we won't have to guess which way it goes when we put it back on. So what I usually do is center it up between these two slots here and just make a mark on both sprockets to chain relationship. That's good there. Then I'll keep outward tension on the sprockets so they don't fall in on each other. And that's it there. Now that the sprocket assembly is off, now's a good time to change the upper tensioner and secondary chain guide. Okay, so to strike all this hardware, I'm going to go ahead and put this paper towel down in the corner here, just in case some hardware falls. And I'll use some air to speed things up here. Okay, strike these two items. Okay, from here we want to remove the tensioner. Put some paper towel in this spark plug hole here. Okay, one tensioner. Okay, for the secondary guide here, I have an E8 socket. I have a magnet to get this bolt out here. It's pretty long. Alright, that's it there. Alright, so I'll get everything prepped and we'll move on to the next step.